Well, it is quite a privilege to be here, and it's wonderful to see so many people coming as well. And you're all, I'm sure, familiar, if not necessarily familiar with the name of Ballynahatty, you're certainly familiar with the Giant's Ring. And the Giant's Ring will figure sort of briefly at the end of what I'm going to say, and most of it will be what really came just immediately before the Giant's Ring was constructed. But first of all, let's sort of place ourselves and have a look at these. These are some, I think, wonderful aerial photographs. They're drone photographs taken by David Craig, and they'll figure at various times through my talk. You can see here where we can't quite see the Giant's Ring car park, but it is just at the corner of the trees there. You can see we're really south of the Giant's Ring at the moment, and we're looking across Ballynahatty, the townland of Ballynahatty. In the distance, you can see the Antrim Hills, and off to our right in the distance, of course, is Belfast, where we are. And the River Lagan is hidden amongst the trees, but it runs in a sort of a loop around Ballynahatty. Just at the corner over here, you can just see a few houses, which would be Edenderry. So that's our sort of our placement. Now, when you go to the site, as you all have done, I'm sure, this is what you see at the top. You see the great Neolithic henge of Ballynahatty, undated, but almost certainly coming out round about 2500 BC, the end of the Neolithic period. What you also see, in fact, within it is this pile of stones, which when I first went there, of course, you just clamber and stand on it, and all your children, then clamber and stand on it, and their grandchildren, and so on and so forth. But that is one of the most important sites in the whole complex, because I think that is really what started off the whole process and the development of this mortuary landscape over time. We also, the other standing site would be a standing stone, which you can see over on that side, and that stands in the field to the northwest of the Giant's Ring, at the end of a low ridge, which is also very, very important in the story. So let's first of all consider what is in that field beyond the Giant's Ring, which is a great prehistoric cemetery. We're turning around, the drone has come round now, and we're looking sort of southeast direction. And what you can see, in fact, at the bottom corner here, in a sort of a lightish patch running across there, is this low ridge. It's not a very high ridge, but it's very important in terms of the topography and the development of the sites. The height of that ridge is just about the same height as the height of the bank of the henge. Right, more or less about the same height, but very important to show. Also, the standing stone that I talked about, you just see that just down at the bottom corner there, which is at the end of this ridge. Moving on round now, and we're on the east side of the Ballynahatty plateau, looking towards the west, and it is really a plateau. I mean, you can clamber around anywhere, you can clamber up. But nevertheless, it gives it sort of an isolated form, really. You can see that there's a steep slope down here, clothed in trees down at this end. See the edge of the Giant's Ring there. There's a wet area, which I think probably has always been. It appears every now and again. It has always been there, I think, and there's probably no investigation's been made of it, but I think it comes back through antiquity as being an important part of the ritual landscape. But we're looking across the area of what is a mortuary landscape. And we know that because there are historical accounts of what has been found here. The drone photographs show a whole series of crop marks coming up. It's probably quite difficult for you to see. The light is a bit bright here, but there are a whole series of crop marks running through. You can maybe make out a parallel line there. There's Edenderry in the distance, and the Lagan, of course, is just next door to Edenderry. Those parallel lines there could be something, well, basically we don't know how old they are, but they could be a Neolithic cursus. It's a possibility. It'd be intriguing if that was the case. They're all part and parcel of this ceremonial landscape. Coming round, maybe you can make out, certainly probably be able to see 3 ring ditches there. They may very well be Bronze Age ring ditches. And if you really stare at this for a long time, you can begin to pick out other crop marks that come round of various sites. And now we're on the west side looking east, and this is really the main crop mark which represents these late Neolithic enclosures, which I've interpreted really as a timber temple. Around like that. And there, okay. Those are the principal areas, and that is really what I spent 10 years excavating. Not the whole of it. It was that part of it. And that took 10 seasons, when I say 10 years, 10 seasons of excavation to actually work out what was happening. The air photograph that you can see here, it shows something sort of relatively simple in terms of a large enclosure with a small enclosure at one end. And that is what, when we started excavating there in 1990, that in fact, we started on that small enclosure, and we were unaware of really what was beyond it to the east. And in fact, you can't really pick it up on that photograph, but there's a whole complex of things happening just to the east of that small enclosure, around the edge of our outer enclosure. I keep talking about inner enclosures and outer enclosures. When we're excavating, we called the inner one BNH6, BNH standing for Ballynahatty, BNH6, and the outer one BNH5. It's all part of the same structure. And at that time, because of all the crop marks coming up, they're all just numbered all around. Giant's Ring starting the thing as BNH1, I think. So let's go a bit further in. And again, probably from the back, you can't see individually what's happening here, but just get the impression that we have the Giant's Ring, we have that sort of light band running across, just running around here. And we have the site that I'm going to principally talk about, which is this one here, right? But there's a mass of other things happening all the way around here. And it's a mortuary landscape. There are burials, there are cremations, and so on and so forth, running back to the early Neolithic and coming right the way through to the Bronze Age. And there's also probably an early medieval part of this. And I think what we may have is the remains of a ring fort, which is just here. So just keep that in the back of your mind, that it's a very, very busy, very intense Neolithic, principally Neolithic landscape. So before we actually get into what it is in effect a site of at the end of the Neolithic, I just want to talk to you about some of the middle Neolithic structures, and specifically those which are in what we would call a passage tomb tradition. Now that site that's within the Giant's Ring, the stone megalith, is probably an early passage tomb, quite a simple one. It's undated. It's been excavated on a few occasions, but there are no real finds coming from it. There was except for a talk of a few fragments of cremated bone were found, but it was attacked quite early on by treasure hunters, so most of the information has been destroyed from the site within the Giant's Ring. But still, that is really the most important one of all. And then there are other sites in this same tradition, this passage grave tradition, spread around through the cemetery. And just to start off very quickly, this is one of them that's found. We call it the 1855 tomb simply because it was found in 1855. It was found to the northwest of the Giant's Ring within the landscape, and down there on the right-hand side you can see a plan of it that was published in the Ulster Journal of Archaeology in 1855, And you can see from that basically, and from my estimated section of what it would have looked like, that it was buried in the ground. It was 8 foot across. It was buried in the ground, about 2 meters deep. It consists of a series of uprights with a corbelled roof, a series of compartments, and within those compartments there were 4 pots, which we might call carracilware pots, typical of passage tombs. There's also parcels of cremated bone scattered through, and those parcels, probably originally the excavator thought that they may have been originally cremations in leather bags, and the leather bags have rotted off. So there were just little piles of cremated material scattered around through those compartments. But at the far end, and curiously enough, although this was buried in the ground, it had an entranceway to it down the bottom there. So people had access to it at various times. At the back, you had the cremated material, a layer of sand which had fallen down through the roof, so there was a hiatus here in terms of its use. And then there were some disarticulated human remains then put on top of it. So the cremated bone was found in the pots, and the disarticulated human remains, apart from this there were two further skulls, were found at the back here. So this sort of sets up in many ways sort of the idea that the dead were being processed by cremation, and also possibly by exposure, so that, you know, the soft parts of the body would rot away or be possibly even physically removed to leave the skeletal remains. And those skeletal remains, well, we don't really know what happened. Were they then put in various tombs around about? Were they kept in houses? Were they passed around? Were they part of a ceremonial use of human bone? We don't know. But there are these two traditions, if you like, of cremation and, let's say, excarnation, at least, going on in. So I should say that the soils of Ballynahatty do not preserve human bone. Cremated bone is preserved. And so you may ask, well, how did this lot survive? Well, this was in the context of a tomb. But if the bone is in contact with the soil, it doesn't survive. It's too acid. During the excavation, we came across another one of these tombs, a much simpler one, and you can see it just at the corner. We have a line of post holes here, a line of post holes coming through, and then we found this tomb, again, in the passage tomb tradition, because it's not specifically like a passage tomb in the sense that this is buried down in the ground. It's not sitting on top of the ground with a mound over it and a passage through it. But nevertheless, it was partially destroyed in antiquity by our temple, and that line of posts coming through. So this is what it looks like, and we can see there's a passage-like chamber, if you like, at the far end. That lump around the outside here is where one of the later post holes had been dug through it. You can see one pot still in situ during the excavation, and these are the carracilware pots, very crude things, rather like half a football, that virtually fall to pieces when you touch them. They're very badly fired, but quite ornate, and they contain cremations. So that's another one of them. And that's quite interesting. There should be a map under that. Let me just go back and see if I can find it. No, it seems to have disappeared. Well, the whole point about it is that if we look at the form, that's the 1855 tomb up here, but these ones here that were found during the excavation, this one is from the centre of the Giant's Ring, and if you look at the shape of it, and that's if you like a full-size one sitting on the ground. This one was found in the ground, but the shape is very, very, very similar, with an entrance through it. And then this one up here was really, really very small, and just nominally had a couple of stones at the base, and some stones around the outside, no more than that high, just nominally aping the idea of having some uprights which would have potentially had a roof on top. there's a consistency running through these. So I think there's a tradition all based on the original tomb, which I think is the one beside the Giant's Ring. And they were just used, they were just small versions of passage tombs, just dug into the ground, rather like kiss, but all have this notional entranceway and all contained cremations and karaoke-ware pots. So that is the, this is what you should have seen underneath that. In terms of dating, they all come out as 3,000, around about 3,350 down to virtually 2,900 BC, sort of towards the end of the Middle Neolithic period. So this is really setting up for what we are coming to. I thought it interesting just to, while we're here, just to talk about what was in those tombs. Well, those cremated material, in the prehistoric period, the cremations weren't necessarily particularly efficient, and sufficient bones survive for you to be able to, hopefully, to present them with an age and a sex. So in the 1855 tomb, we've got there were 4 adults, at least 4 adults in cremations. There were 2 females in terms of unburnt bone. Got 2 females, 20 to 25 years of age, 2 mature males, 1 mature female, and 1 juvenile, plus a bit of cattle bone. Then going through the other ones, we've got a cremation pit with 1 child, aged 4 to 5 years of age, another cremation of a female of 30 to 40 years. Then we have 2 mature adults and a child of 9 to 10 years of age. And down here we have a mature adult, a late teen, and a child. So these are not, we can't really say what the physical status of them would be, but these are family burials, right? So we're not thinking in terms of you know, an isolated and important male burial or something like that. These are family burials. Right, let's go on to the Neolithic rapidly. And this shows the excavation, just so where we are. You see the excavation about midway through the excavation. In fact, you can see the various sites begin to come out. You can see where we are. We're sitting on top of the ridge. You can see that in the fence line. And let's head on to look at these enclosures. This is the inner enclosure, the small inner enclosure. And the thing that hopefully immediately you would see, in fact, is that we've got very deep post holes. And here are 2 of my favorite excavators from the past. But there's on post holes either side of the entrance to Ballynahatty-6, to the inner enclosure. And you can see just what size they are. Also, what you have to remember is that there's been so much damage due to ploughing up here. A lot of the material has been physically removed, and then we have the current plough soil. Current plough soil has been taken out. So you can really add probably 30 to 40 centimetres to the original, to find the original surface, right? So these are very deep post holes. And I'm not going to bore you with each individual post hole. We'll be here till midnight. But just to give you an idea, if you can sort of see what we're dealing with here, here is a whole series of profiles of the larger post holes. And they're characterized really, apart from the depth, around about 1.8 to 2.2 meters in depth as were measured, but I say probably deeper. We have a ramp running down one side. Most of them, see these ramps, because the posts that were going into them were big posts. So they had to have a ramp in order to be able to get the post down into the post hole and to lift it up. We can also often see that there is a dent in the opposite side here, opposite the ramp, around here again. And this is where these large timbers were tunneled down the ramp and they hit the other side of the post hole. Right? And they scoured the other side. In one case, up here, they clearly lost control, and the side of the post hole has got a great gouge in it as well. The other point maybe to think about here is that the bottom is actually quite wide, and that enabled them to position the post within the post hole. Right? Now, they were big posts and very heavy posts, but they were still managed probably to leave them around into the exact position that they wanted them to be in. So this was a very precise operation in terms of putting in the posts. And quite often we can see there's like a bit of a dimple at the bottom of here. Because remember, when they're cutting these posts, using stone tools, stone axes, the bottom of the post will end up being shaped rather like that. So it's got a sort of pointy end to it. So how big were the posts? Well, you know, using this generalized ratio of 1 to 3, which is what would normally be used for a freestanding post. So 1 part underground, 3 parts above ground, and that gives us stability of a post. So just working at that, and these are our estimates, these are what the sizes of the posts would have been that have gone into these post holes. The tallest posts were what we call the 4 posters, which were both within the inner enclosure and in the outer enclosure. We've got these 4 post settings. So these were marker posts, exceptionally tall. Here, I put in a sort of telegraph post by the side of it so you can see sort of the scale, or a house there. So these are into scale, so you can get some idea of how tall these posts potentially were. We don't know if they were exactly that height, but the depth seems to tell us that this is the sort of heights that we're dealing with. Most of the posts of the general enclosures were coming out at this sort of height here. Okay. And then there were a range of other post holes, some of which were smaller, but even what we call our eastern setting was 2.5 meters high. And in terms of the post holes themselves, I mean, post holes are, you know, you stand in the post hole, it's this height, or this depth rather, for the post hole. So this is really, if we put the posts in the post holes, hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on here. And what I'm going to do is very briefly run through these sort of clusters of posts, and just to talk somewhat about what we're dealing with here. Start off, I'll talk about this area here to start off with, and then I think we'll look at the outer enclosure. The outer enclosure is coming around here and it heads off 100 meters down the field and comes back again. Okay, so we've just got the edge of this outer enclosure, an entrance here. Then there's what we call the annex, which was an elaborate entrance here. And then the final thing that went in was this entrance chamber and this structure down here. So very quickly, I want to run through these just to give you an idea of the complexity of it all. When we look at the inner enclosure, we've got a central square, approximately 2 meters square. There's no obvious doorway into this, and it's always been really interpreted as a platform rather than a structure that you would actually go into. So this is going to be our platform here. Then there are these 4 tall marker posts running through here like this. Okay. Then beyond that, there is an outer ring of posts, sorry, an inner ring of posts, and then an outer ring of posts. There's a very clear entranceway. There's also a flattened facade at this point here. This is perfectly circular, but there's a flattened facade. And these are double post holes here, and here, and here. So there's something quite different. And during the excavation, we found evidence of planking. So probably on either side of this entranceway, this would have been planked. Then going out here, we call what we call the eastern setting, because we started excavating here, we moved that way, we found these posts and thought, well, they're to the east, we call them the eastern setting, before we realized what was beyond that. Curious structure, you can see this, it's got a curved back and it looks as though it's part of the segment that's coming through here. And although we didn't excavate it, we think there's one on the other side of that as well. And then the first of the post holes of the outer enclosure and its entrance down there. So let's just move on again. So this is at the entrance when we're excavating, what the entrance post holes look like. The double post holes, and you see something in the nature of the depth of them coming through, and the complexity of these posts, one cutting another post. When the posts were put in, of course, they weren't all excavated like that. One post hole was excavated, the post was put in, backfilled, rammed in, then the next post hole was constructed. But having excavated them, these post holes sort of run together. Moving on to the outer enclosure. Okay, so we've moved on. There's our eastern setting now. We're moving this way. Again, paired post holes running through. And you can see some of the nature of them there. I'm going to move on quite quickly here because I want to get on to other things. So here's our outer enclosure with entranceway, and you can see what's happening now in here. This is the entrance just in here, like this. And it's important because it shows and demonstrates that there's been a reorientation of this entrance. So the outer enclosure around here, entrance, then there's B&H6 up here, the inner enclosure. And so this was the axis of the entrance to that. And that just headed on down here and just went sort of down off the side of the of this ridge. There didn't seem to be any, although that was where the entrance was, and many of timber circles have that orientation, the southeast orientation to the entrance. It didn't seem as though there was, from a processional point of view, there was any particular way in. You could sort of come round from the side and go in the entrance, come down from the north and go in the entrance. That was it. But what they did is to reorientate the entrance to run along the ridge line and down to the east. And this is what we're looking at here. This structure, which is built on the outside, again, if you look at, there are paired posts running through, paired posts running down here, paired posts running up here. Smaller, but the same form as the outer enclosure. Then you have, after that, in sort of towards the final phase, you have another line of posts being put in around here, massive posts running down here, and another line of posts running across here like this. So we have a sequence of things going on here, but the basic structure seems to be these paired posts, both the inner enclosure, the outer enclosure, and our annex running through here. The entrance chamber was then put in, and in order to put that in and to put the entry point in this direction, as you can see here, our final entrance orientation is this way. The original entrance orientation was this way, and putting in this structure meant they had to put in extra post holes here, and at the top they took out one of the original post holes of the outer enclosure and replaced it with a corner post of this square enclosure. So it's later, it's going in right at the very end. Now down at the bottom is our entrance up there again. We have a series of posts running down here, again paired posts running down across here. We excavated one end and the other end, and we could see these on the air photographs coming out here. So another set of paired posts and a series of individual posts running outside them. So by now you should be thoroughly confused. Posts everywhere. This line of posts were massive. What you're looking at there is this is what happened, if you like, right at the very end. But these posts, you can see the size of them here. This is not the post hole, this is the butt of the post. It's nearly a metre across. So, you know, when we talk about posts, we're not thinking in terms of fence posts. Tree trunks. These are massive, massive tree trunks. Now you think about cutting down a tree with a trunk of that diameter with stone axes and then lopping off the branches, trimming it, dragging that to site, and then upending it and putting it in as a series of massive posts which represent this final facade, if you like, to get into the site. Tremendously impressive site. Because of the later destruction, this is part of our pairing of posts of the annex, but we only picked up the pair right at the bottom of this because of this later destruction on the site, which I'll talk about towards the end. Let's just look at this one here. Here are the posts running down through here. You can see how big they are, and just the bases of these. You can see a few of these paired posts for the annex. And here's our entrance chamber. A square entrance chamber was inserted with 4 massive posts here. These are marker posts again. You know, they almost match those marker posts on the inner enclosure. These are very tall posts. Not quite in a square. Think of this as being like a square pulled apart slightly. Point being that the entry point runs through here, whereas on the inner enclosure, that is the terminus, that's the end point, if you like, of entry into the whole system. I'm going to skim through the artifacts, but we don't have time to really talk about them in any great detail. But just to show you that we had quite a large lithic component, a lot of flint tools, a lot of debitage, so flint was being made on site. Most of the flint there would have been scrapers. And you have to be able to interpret a scraper to know what it was actually used for. And in terms of where we find the lithics, so lithics scattered all over the site, in the topsoil and so on. But where we actually find the lithics in situ, and looking at the inner enclosure and our square outer enclosure, you can see that in terms of numbers, because you probably can't see them from the back, we've got individual pieces. There are 300 pieces there, 300, 101, 153, 417, 205. Over the back end, 9, 4, nothing, 2, 1, so on. So the concentration of the lithics is all on the south side. And if we look at our square enclosure here, 109, 118, 69, 148, 114, 42, 26, 50, 41, 6, 10, 9, 1, nothing. All the placement of all the lithics are on the south side. And what's at the south side? The passage tomb, right? Across the field is the passage tomb. So we're on top of the ridge. Passage tomb is further down to the south. And the emphasis really in terms of the lithics, where the lithics are being found, is all on the south side. We found 2 complete axes and parts of 3 more. When you consider the sheer amount of wood that's been brought onto the site, it is just amazing how few axes we actually found. You know, you would imagine there'd be hundreds of them, but no. Possibly 2 stone balls, and this is probably a lignite bead. In terms of pottery, essentially it's grooved ware, which is we find associated with timber sites. And where do we find the grooved ware? A mere scatter up this end, but in terms of our entrance chamber, we find most of it down here or scattered around up here, in this area here. And it's in this area here that we find evidence of hearths. We've got the pottery, a lot of flint coming from that area. So that is clearly one aspect that we're going to, I'll come back to that in a moment as to what may be happening there. But again, generally speaking, we've got a southerly positioning of the pottery as well. Again, it's where it's overlooking the passage tombs. Our site is just here, right? So we're looking north, and you can see there's Belfast Lough in the distance. But this area here is a boggy area, which in Neolithic times I think would have been open water. So we're able to extract some pollen, and the pollen record shows, concentrate on this end here. This is when at the early Neolithic we begin to see opening of the woodland and initial clearance. The middle Neolithic, we got by 3600 BC, we see arable cultivation and cereals are in the area. By 3450 BC, sporadic arable and grassland, maybe grassland is beginning to impinge again. By the late Neolithic, that's 3000 BC, coming into the period that we're talking about with our timber temples. By 3000 BC, decline of cultivation by this stage. An increase in oak forest in the area around about. By 2500 BC, there's regeneration of the woodland. So this is marking maybe the end of our timber site at this point. And then in the early Bronze Age, we get increase in land use coming back in again. And dating, putting all this in a dating context, well, we'll just go with this one here, I think, but it sort of explains it. Our BNH6, our inner enclosure, starting off around about 2700 BC, and our outer enclosure and all the other bits and pieces associated with it are really coming to the end by 2550 BC, something like that. That's the time period that we're looking at. This is the end of the Neolithic period. And it fits into other timber circles, also reach a peak at the same time. Our Ballynahatty burials, that's the passage graves, peaking earlier on, around about 3000 BC. So it all fits quite nicely into what's happening in the rest of Ireland as well. Okay, let's get on to construction and use. So back to the inner enclosure. There's a regularity for the way that this site is constructed. And the blobs are the post holes. And if you look at it, it's all beautifully laid out. We can see a series of concentric circles, and the post holes fall nicely onto that. So our platform is on this circle, and a regular distance from one to the other, and we come to the 4 big posts, and then again, same distance, the inner ring, we miss another one, and then the outer ring. So you can imagine how this has been laid out. Stake in the ground and a length of rope, and just marking in the ground where the things come. So equal lines running through, equally distant apart, and also that same distance between the posts as well. So using standard unit of measurement for this. But then, let's consider what's happening over here. Think of a line, an axis running through and through the entranceway. You stand at that point there. In fact, it was marked out from here. There was a pit here. So you can stretch a line from that point, and you create this line here, which is the flattened front of the facade. And you can stretch another line around there like that from the center of this ring, which is the same diameter, out to here and out to here. Take a line across and you end up with these segmental, I think they're probably ossuaries, cupboards, if you like. And then the main entrance through BNH5, the outer enclosure, beyond that. So it's beautifully laid out. If you've got that in your mind, you can go and you can create one of these things anywhere. And in fact, I think that we have at least one occasion where they did do it to that same formula. It is formulaic, and it's very elegant the way it's been done. So early on, trying to work out what it may have looked like. So, in toying around with ideas, you have a lot of posts. So what actually could that have looked like? If you have a lot of posts and you don't do anything with them, even though they're regular on the ground, they just look like a tangle of posts, nothing more. You've got to do something with those posts to make it look like some sort of structure. And the obvious way of doing that is you put lintels on top of the posts to define what they're like. So there may have been lintels on top of them. And what's its business about the paired posts? You know? We know, I'm sure that the interior was a platform, and we know that we got our timber facade, plank facade. What was happening elsewhere? Was it just open? Could you just walk through it? And I really don't think so. I mean, the way the whole thing is constructed, this was meant to hide and to present views at certain places. You weren't supposed to see everything at one time. You've got to be very, very careful about what you were seeing and what you were looking at. So there must have been some sort of fill. Could it just be wattle or something like that? Well, why would you put in these massive posts, you know, posts with 60 centimeters, nearly a meter across? Why would you put in posts like that and then just put wattle in between them? And the wattle is going to last 3 or 4 years or whatever if it's just exposed to the atmosphere. So no, there must have been something much more substantial. So I originally came down on this is what was happening basically. This is just taken from the web method of fencing. So you put in your uprights, and then if you like, the aerial parts of your trees, the small branches and things, you then put those in between. And this forms really effectively a wall running round and defining your sites. This is probably quite a good way of looking at it. Substantial timbers and an infill. So in terms of Ballynahatty then, I think the outer enclosure and indeed the inner enclosure will have walls like this, defining the area. Right. Try and put this lot together then. So with this, Robert Barrett did an interesting series of developing the site to visually try and show what it would have looked like. That, I mean, they're not meant to be sort of state-of-the-art, absolutely realistic, but it was designed really to present a model so that we could look at that model, go into it, turn it around, and see just what was happening on the ground. So here's our first phase. So we got our inner enclosure, and then in the later part of this first phase, the outer enclosure is put in. Then in the second phase, we have a reorientation of the entrance, and this is running along the ridge line now. So it becomes more impressive because you have to go up the end of the ridge to get to it. And then this is put in. So we have our the second chamber running through here. We have the annex. We have the massive facade that runs down here, and then this curious structure which is added on the side for whatever reason, because it doesn't seem to particularly do anything. It isn't even articulated down here, and we already have a definition of the entrance with this running down here. So why would you put that in? What does that mean? What's the point of it? Well, we take a lower view, and you can see that this really is a very impressive structure now. There are something like nearly 500 individual timbers have been put in to create this structure. The amount of work that's gone into this is incredible. Now, that line here, what is the point of that? The giant's ring and the passage tomb is on this side, okay? This is on a ridge, so if we go on, we're now downslope. If our backs are to the giant's ring and to the passage tomb that's in the center of it. This is the ridge running up, and this is what we now see. And that later line of posts just blends in with what's going on here. And what you see is instead of an enclosure which would run round like this, we now see something which is altogether much bigger. It's purely cosmetic. It's purely meant to impress, you know. Walking on further along at the base of the ridge, we begin to see the facade coming up, and when eventually we come to the bottom of the ridge and we look up the ridge, this is what we now see. This massive facade that runs across, designed, I think, to awe whoever is coming in. We see those marker posts which mark the position of something, of a position of importance. But it isn't quite right, because when you look at it, it's lopsided. You've got the entrance and you've got the major part of the site is hanging on that side. It doesn't, to the Neolithic architects, and I think there were architects involved here, this wasn't quite right. So what, in fact, they did, let's go on a bit. Sorry, got to get the right ones here, is they put in some posts here. That line of posts, which we excavated this line, we got to that point and couldn't see anything more. They stopped there. But now, if you look, this line of posts balances that part of the major building. So our facade is centrally placed, purely cosmetic. But not just that. If you look at what's happening here on this side, the last two posts are closer together. Just as when we look over here, the posts over here, this side, get closer together because it's curving round. So they put those two posts together, even though those posts are in a straight line, to give the impression that it's curving round to balance the other side. Very, very carefully constructed monument. We've gone up to there and we're now standing at the front door, if you like. If we look to the left, just go back to the excavation because this is the line of the facade. Look where it's leading. Running right the way around here is a gentle curve and it comes round, and up there is the passage tomb. So the facade and the orientation of the facade is referencing that passage tomb, which was probably 1500 years earlier. Right, let's go in now. We're now inside the square enclosure, and either side of we would have these massive posts. Imagine, because it's a mortuary structure, almost certainly, imagine you are carrying a corpse, right? And you've progressed through here, you've come to this point, you leave your corpse there, and from the outside, people can't really see what's happening, but that's where the marker posts are. They know that something is happening there. We're now going to turn sharp right. Sorry, we're going to look up first of all, just to emphasize that now, because you're totally enclosed, what is emphasized is the sky, right? Because what's outside is diminished. You've got these walls around you. You're looking at the sky all the time. So now if we go off to one side into the northern part of the annex, this is where we found the pottery, where we've got traces of burning. This is probably where feasting was taking place. Should have put a door in there, I guess. But this is an area, again, which was set apart. This is an area where you pause before going further on in. So now let's go back, and we're standing in our square entrance chamber, and we look through the entrance into the inner enclosure, and what we see is just the back end of the inner enclosure. We don't see what is in there. We don't see our inner enclosure and all those bits and pieces, the eastern settings. We can't see that. The sight line has been carefully constructed so you don't see any of that until you go through the entrance, and then you see the inner enclosure. We have some appropriately wooden figures here, I hope you realise. We've got one of the eastern settings here, and I think they're probably ossuaries where bones were kept. Pure supposition, because we didn't find any bones in there. Bones wouldn't survive, remember. But I think that's what we're looking at here. We look around on the other side. again the ossuaries, and remember the way that these are constructed, so you can see the whole of the inside because it's segmented from one particular point. You can see the whole of what's inside. And this is very important because it's a point where you're going really, if you like, from the land of the living to the land of the dead. And you're going from the land where people are recognizable, you can see them, where people cannot be recognized. So you're going from the known, if you like, to a state of being an ancestor, an anonymous ancestor, going from one state to the next state. And this is a specific point at which you cross that line. So here we are, we have our man standing here at that point between the two eastern settings. And it's precisely at that point that looking ahead, you can see what is happening in the center of the inner enclosure. The platform, I think, where bodies were being exposed, process of excarnation. You get into that area and you've got the bodies, but also it'd be very quiet because remember the way that these walls are constructed, it'd be very, very quiet. It'd absorb all the sound. You could hear a pin drop inside this, regardless of what's going on outside. The only exception might be carrion birds, the squawk of carrion birds around about the place. And probably when you looked at this, the tops of the posts would be white with bird droppings. And of course, you would have the awful smell of decaying flesh about the place. It would be an awful place in that sense to be. And you can see, looking at it from the top, just how enclosed the whole thing would be. So definitely an area sort of set apart. Bodies, I imagine, would have been brought here and exposed, at least for part of the time that this monument was standing. Well, I haven't mentioned the Giant's Ring, and we've only got 5 minutes left to do it. The issue with the Giant's Ring is that we don't know the date of it. There's no dating evidence for it, except that we would expect it to be at the end of the Neolithic period, as is with most other henges that we find. And I think it was constructed more or less at the time of the final phase of our timber structure. And I think that they work together. One isn't necessarily a replacement for the other. But if you like, how would you move around this area? I mean, it's a ceremonial zone. You can see from what I've said about the entry into the timber enclosure, into the temple, running upslope. So that's a defined area to get into it. And in order to get onto the plateau, you can get onto the plateau from anywhere really, but if you're processing into the area, you don't want an unseemly scramble up a slope. You want to have a defined way of getting up there. And I think there is a natural way to get in there, just at this point here. There's a natural sort of cleft in the landscape at this point. And I think that's probably the way that people would have processed to get in there. The Lagan is down at this end. This is the edge of the plateau, running around here like this, steep edge of the plateau. So you'd have come in and you've gone up through here. Don't know if there was an entry on this side of the Giant's Ring. There may have been, but certainly there's definitely the present entrance, I think, is probably the main entrance to it. There's a line of posts, I think, around here like this, which maybe help to define the way you got through. And remember, when you're at this point here, this is when you would look up and you'd see the walls of the timber enclosure around there. Then you could progress in, or you could go round and up the slope to get in. So there's a great movement through this ceremonial landscape at this time. Also remember, although it's on a ridge, our temple is raised that bit. The temple and the platform in the center is the highest point on the whole Ballynahatty plateau. It's the highest point of all. So I think we're going from the ground, from the base level, and we're running up, if you like, towards the sky. And this process of exposure is also, you can call it maybe sky burial, in a sense that you have, apart from the usual rats running around eating bits and pieces, you'd have carrion birds who would also be helping to remove bits of flesh and so on and so forth, as well as the wind, weather, time, all acting to reduce the body to simple skeletal mass. So you're going, emphasis is on the sky, but in the center of the giant's ring, if you like, and with our passage tomb that's in there, and that presumably would have had a covering of earth originally and a more defined passage, and maybe that is where you went down into the ground. So you've got this sort of duality of the sky and the earth, the two together, balancing one another. You've got the present and the past. You've got the land of people, and you have the land really up on the ridge of the people from the past. All those people that died before you are all present there, up there on top of the ridge. I'm looking for my last 2 minutes here. What happened at the end of all this? Well, the giant's ring is still there. The timber enclosure certainly ain't. Let's go back and look very quickly at the post holes. One or two of the post holes were like this. Okay, so imagine you dig the hole, you put the post in, you backfill it with a primary fill on either side. Then you have, the post goes in, it's in there for, we think, maybe 3-4 generations. Potentially it rots. Okay, it's always going to rot at some stage, but this one, if the base of it rotted in situ, you end up with a looser fill, a sort of darker stained fill, and in this case, a void as well, because it's rotted under the ground. And then the surface material gets pulled down as this collapses, right? In this case, a great wodge of charcoal. You look at this one, which is one of the big 4 posters. Again, you can see where the post went, but it's full of stone and it's full of charcoal and charcoal stained soil. A post could not have rotted and produced that effect. The post would have to have been removed in order to create that, and then charcoal and stones put back down to mark the position of the post. So somehow they levered the post out. Now, to start off with, there's all this burning around. The site was completely burnt. But it wasn't just, they didn't just set fire to it. This was a ritual act, and I think we can really think that the site has been cremated. Just as a body is cremated, so the site was cremated. And the whole of this structure was important, so important that they had to lift out the posts, and presumably they burnt the butts of the posts as well. And then that wasn't it. They had to preserve the site, and they preserved the site by backfilling, well, but by the charcoal, which is preserved, that doesn't rot. Charcoal is put down and stones are put down into the post sockets. So if you think about the stone, it's like a skeleton, and the charcoal is like sort of burnt flesh, if you like. So they preserved the whole site in the ground. And probably there were little piles of stone which would represent where these things would have been. It happens all over. Here you can see this is the primary fill has been taken out of one of these post holes, and you can see the stones running down where the post would have been. And where our grand facade was, look at the masses of stones that have been put in when the posts have been removed. Those posts were so big that they dug a channel through instead of taking out individual posts. How can you do this? Well, we did an experiment. And this is the last slide. We did an experiment. Billy Dunlop, who then was in his late 70s, I think, I gave him an antler pick and a bucket. And I said, what you've got to do is to dig a post hole 2 meters deep, just like the ones we've been excavating for the past 5 or 6 years. And he did that, and it took him, I think it was 18 or 19 hours to do. And then he didn't do the ramp. The ramp would have taken, probably if you put a ramp in, it would have taken about 25 hours to dig a post hole. But then we got a bit of telegraph pole, we put it in, he backfilled it, rammed it down so it's nice and firm. How do you get that out then? So just thought, what's the simplest way of doing it? Just by levers, really. So we've got 2 pieces of wood, which you put either side of the post, a loose bit of rope around the bottom, just there, and then pull the levers down over these fulcrum stones just here. Okay, and as the levers went down, the rope was tightened around the base of the post, and the post just gently came up a few centimeters, just like pulling a cork out of a wine bottle, and then just had to lean against the post to stop it going down, and then the levers were put up again, dropped down, and just kept on going like that. And eventually, it came out 2 meters out of the ground. Now, you could argue, of course, it's nice smooth post and so on, it'd be easy to do that. But remember, the bigger posts and the awkward posts had these bell-shaped pits cut in them as well, in order to help try and get them out, right? So we had that to take into account. And the other thing about it, as the post came out, it created an awful lot of mess around the bottom here. Jumble of soil and so on and so forth. And if you remember, if this had been just after the whole site had been burnt, there'd be masses of charcoal around everywhere, people paddling around in bits and pieces, there'd be soil everywhere. And this is why during the excavation we found it virtually impossible to find the tops of these post holes. It's because of so much disruption around here. And just to make the point, there's a 2 meter ranging rod down in the post socket, and there I am, looking a little bit younger with a little bit more hair, dropping a stone down into the post hole. So there we have it. That is the story. I'm sure you may have questions. I'm delighted to answer them. But that is basically the story of what I think is the timber temple that came to an end round about 2500, 2550 BC. Thank you very much indeed.